Hey friends, Kenny Ortiz here. In this video, we're going to talk about, as you see on the screen there, logical fallacies. I'm just going to run through a bunch of examples of fallacies. This video is a part of the curriculum for a course I teach at Bethany Global University. The course is Contemporary Issues in Gender and Sexuality. And people frequently ask, how is studying logical fallacies and elements of rhetoric and debate, how is that a part of gender and sexuality course? Well, the reason is because as a part of this course, we are frequently going to be discussing topics and elements that are controversial and hotly debated. And it is my experience that in our contemporary society, that logical fallacies really kind of reign supreme in the area of debate when it comes to gender and sexuality. Much of the debates around gender and sexuality in our society are not based on content. They're not based on facts. They're not based on science. They're not based on rational evidence. The vast majority of people who are arguing in this space are often using logical fallacies. And my goal is to challenge Christians to be able to engage in these conversations in a way that is Christ honoring, that a way is persuasive, that a way is that shines light on the darkness that is so pervasive in our society, but also in a way that models good rhetoric and good critical thinking, right? I believe as Christians, we should utilize the brain that God gave us to the best of our ability. And I believe we should model that for other people. I believe we should be sober-minded. We should be rational. We should be kind. But we should also be very clear in the way we engage with arguments. I believe this is an element or a way in which we love God with all of our mind, right? Both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, the idea of loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength is commended to Christians. And so I think the loving God with your mind piece is often missed. And so I think Christians, it's important that we engage in these sort of topics and we engage in these debates, not only with kindness and diplomacy, although those are important, but we should also engage it with fierce sober-mindedness and fierce rationality, and with wisdom and techniques to expose the fallacies that kind of reign supreme in many of these conversations. So the reason why logical fallacies is a part of a gender and sexuality course simply is there's a lot of logical fallacies being used in debates related to gender and sexuality. And I believe that Christians have the obligation to expose those fallacies, but also to model for others how to argue without using fallacies. If we can do that, if we can expose the fallacies, we'll help promote truth in these conversations, and we'll help other people be more likely to be more open to the truth if we're exposing their rhetorical errors and erroneous thought processes as we have these conversations. So that's the reason why I am passionate about this topic, and it's a part of a course that it may not seem on the surface why it would be a part of. All right, let me give you a couple examples of logical fallacies that stick out to me. Circular reasoning or circular argument. Here's an example that someone may have, and I'm trying to make the screen a little bigger for you there so you can see that. Here's an example of a logical fallacy someone may use that's circular reasoning. Opium is sleep-inducing because it has sleep-inducing quality. Wait a minute. Why is opium sleep-inducing? Well, because it makes me fall asleep. That's why it's sleep-inducing. That doesn't answer the question. Okay. Now that may sound silly, but people use these sort of questions. People use these sorts of arguments all the time. Every person who murders is mentally ill because only a mentally ill person would murder someone. Okay. You've assumed that you have to be mentally ill to murder. Now, maybe you're right, but you haven't proven that in your statement, right? Here's another circular reasoning example. Ghost exists because I saw a ghost in my closet. Okay, because you saw a ghost in your closet, that means ghost exists. Well, maybe you're wrong. Maybe it wasn't a ghost, right? This is also argument for anecdotal experience. Here's another one. This is a one that is frequently I've heard tragically. She needed an abortion because an abortion was the only way to solve her predicament. So you're saying the only way to solve her problem was to get an abortion because only an abortion could solve her problem? That doesn't argue. That doesn't make your point. Right? Here's some additional examples. The best theologians I know are in favor of women being pastors because good theologians should be in favor of women being pastors. See, this person is saying that only good, like that if you're not in favor of a woman being a pastor, then you're not a good theologian. So this is a form of circular argument. Women should be allowed to be pastors because so many female pastors are doing a good job as pastors. Okay, that's again, it's circular reasoning. It doesn't actually, you're using an assumption or an implication of your statement to prove the original statement. It doesn't actually work. Here's another one people use whenever we're talking about homosexuality. Being gay is natural because I know a guy who is naturally gay. By the way, this is an exact quote from someone that I heard from. This person who said this was actually like a very intelligent person, actually, like very intelligent. I was shocked they would say this. I was like, do you not realize it's a total logical fallacy you have there? Being against same-sex marriage is unloving because loving people wouldn't be against two people getting married. Like, again, you're assuming that love means you're always in favor of two people of the same sex getting married. And therefore, that's unloving. Well, if you ask someone, what makes same-sex marriage unloving? Or excuse me, what makes being against it unloving? And you would say, well, because, you wouldn't be against these two people getting married if you were loving. You haven't answered the question. People do this all the time. Being gay is natural because every gay person feels it naturally. This is also a hasty generalization, right? You're making an assumption about every gay person that may not be true, actually. I'll skip ahead. Next, okay, hasty generalization. Someone says the students in my class took Ken Fedetta's preaching class. That took Ken's class have become more engaged in class. We should have mandatory preaching classes for the whole school to improve all students' engagements. Ken Fedetta is one of my colleagues at Bethany Global University. And so he teaches a preaching class at our school. This is a hasty generalization, right? Just because someone takes a preaching class doesn't assume they're going to be better engaging. Okay. Here's another one. Beth Moore is a great preacher. Therefore, all women can preach. Well, that's not necessarily true. Okay. Or someone may say, well, my wife doesn't want to be a pastor, so I guess no woman wants it. Well, that's not true either. Just because your wife doesn't want to be a pastor doesn't mean there are other women out there, right? So I've heard people say this. Well, women shouldn't be pastors. Look, my wife doesn't want to be a pastor. Okay, well, that's not a good argument. If you believe women should not be pastors, that's fine. Just back it up from the scripture. Don't use your own anecdotal experience, right? That's a hasty generalization. Slippery slope. Here's another example. Here's an example of slippery slope. Not studying on Saturdays will lead you to not having a job. So it's morally wrong if you don't study on Saturdays. Okay, wait a minute. Time out. Right? You might be able to study on a different, hey, the slippery slope argument as well. If you don't study on Saturdays, then you'll fail the tests. Well, what if he studies on Fridays or Sundays? Right? You're making an argument for something that the slope doesn't actually guarantee. Like, there's no guarantee of a slope toward not having a job just because someone chooses to study on a day other than a Saturday, right? Here's another example, another slippery slope argument. If people own knives, that will lead to stabbings. So owning a knife is wrong. I intentionally chose knife there, not another apparatus, right? To kind of expose, like, that doesn't actually, like, wait a minute. So owning a knife is somehow wrong because there might be stabbings? That's a slippery slope argument. You haven't actually proven to me that owning a knife is morally wrong. You haven't done that. Yeah, it might lead to stabbings. That's correct. It also leads to me cutting my steak. So you're saying it's morally wrong? Here's another one. Marijuana leads to worse drugs, so it's bad. Well, maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe marijuana is bad. Maybe it's not. But that's not a good argument. Okay. The PCUSA, which is a denomination, they ordain women, and then eventually they ordain gays. Ordaining women eventually leads to ordaining gays. If you don't know, the PCUSA, very prominent, one of the four major Presbyterian denominations in the United States, and now beyond that. Many years ago began to ordain women to the pastorate, allowing women pastors. And now there's a lot of PCUSA churches that are now actually allowing gay people, people who are openly gay in same-sex marriages, so-called same-sex marriages, allowing them to be pastors and preachers in PCUSA churches across America. And there's a lot of people, mainly in other Presbyterian denominations, like the PCA, which is the more conservative one. They're saying things like, you see what the PCUSA did? First, they let women in, and then it led to the gays getting in. So we can't let women in. Okay, well, that's not a good argument. Again, if you think women should not be pastors, that's fine. Just show me in the scriptures. But the idea that the PCUSA started ordaining gay people is going to guarantee that everyone is not going to start ordaining gay people just because they have women in leadership or women in the pastorate, That doesn't fly. That's a slippery slope argument. It's logically fallacious. Okay, it's intellectually dishonest, and it's kind of offensive. So don't use that argument. There's a difference between the slippery slope argument and the worst case fallacy argument. Okay, worst case fallacy argument does not typically proclaim that a thing is wrong. Right, the slippery slope argument, this person is usually saying to do this thing is wrong because it leads to something. Right, owning a knife is wrong because it might lead to stabbings. Okay. Smoking marijuana is morally wrong because it'll definitely lead you to make worse decisions or do worse drugs. Where the worst case scenario fallacy is a little softer than that. It's really just more saying something should be avoided, right? The worst case fallacy would say allowing people to own knives would lead to stabbings. Therefore, people ought not have a knife, or people should avoid owning a knife. It's a little softer, right? So the person who's using the worst case fallacy is basically saying, well, here's the worst case scenario, so we should avoid that. And what often will happen is people will use the worst case fallacy as a way to sound softer than the slippery slope. So they sound more moral, they sound more diplomatic. So it's easier to kind of let this slide, and it's easier to kind of fall victim. It's easier to be in an argument with someone if they're using the worst case fallacy rather than a slippery slope. It's easier for you to not to notice it. So you may end up losing that argument when you shouldn't, because you kind of let something slide or you didn't notice it. So you got to be careful for the worst case fallacy scenario. Also, bringing up the worst case scenario, let me just kind of pause for a second. Whenever we're having decisions being made as leaders, like discussing the worst case scenario isn't the bad. Like, it's okay to say, okay, what's the worst case scenario? What's the worst thing that could happen? And it's okay to talk about that and discuss it and have it be a part of the conversation, right? But sometimes people bring up the worst case scenario fallacy and like, okay, that shuts down the argument, right? So right now, for example, the coronavirus is happening, COVID-19. There are people out there saying things like, well, the worst thing that could happen is there's a massive spike in cases. Therefore, everything should be shut down indefinitely. Okay, well, that's not a really good argument. Like, it's good to bring up the worst case fallacy. It's very valuable to have that conversation. But just because the worst case scenario exists potentially doesn't guarantee it's going to happen. And there's some other potential downsides or detriments on the other side of the argument. So I think you need to weigh both of them. The worst case definitely should be considered, but it doesn't make it ironclad, right? So if someone is bringing up the worst case, it doesn't mean they're automatically giving a fallacy. If they're bringing up the worst case in context of multiple other pieces of evidence, and a potential worst case scenario is just one piece of evidence amongst many, then that's okay. That's not a fallacy, all right? The fallacy is when someone brings up the worst case and they assume the worst case scenario is likely to happen, therefore we shouldn't even do anything. That's the worst case scenario fallacy. We don't want to go that route. And it's really, really easy to fall victim to this in an argument because it sounds more diplomatic. It sounds right. Good. Let me keep going. So I talked about the slippery slope there. Strawman argument. Strawman argument is very, very popular. Probably one of the most popular logical fallacies out there. Someone may say something like this. A politician may say, there are millions of illegal votes, and there could very well be millions of illegal votes. So we need voter ID laws. Okay. If someone says we have to have voter ID laws, someone says that. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong. I don't know. It's a political conversation for a different class. That's fine. If someone says we have to have voter ID laws, and they're saying, well, there could be lots of illegal votes, and that's why we have to do it. Well, the idea that there's lots of illegal votes isn't actually combating whether or not we need to have voter ID laws, right? If someone says, I don't want to have voter ID because I think it disenfranchises homeless people, and you say, well, there's a lot of illegal votes. Okay, your illegal vote argument is arguing against something that actually isn't there, right? It's a straw man. You're basically making it seem as if they are saying it's okay to have illegal votes. This person may not like the idea they have illegal votes, but you're assuming something. That's a straw man, right? Another example would be, let's say John says, here's an example on the screen. He says, I think we should hire someone to redesign our website. And Lola says, you're saying we should throw our money away on external resources instead of building up our in-house design team? That's going to hurt our company in the long run. Okay. Let's say that's what Lola were to say. Okay. No, John just says we should hire someone to redesign the website. Lola is saying, you think we should just throw away money. We should hurt the team. See, she is arguing against throwing away money. But John is actually not advocating that we throw away money. So it's a straw man argument. Lola is arguing against an argument that's actually not there. She's arguing against a man that's actually not in the conversation. She's not arguing against John in this case. Okay. Another example related to the pandemic, on Facebook, I basically made a comment that I thought it's appropriate for people to wear masks. If you disagree, that's fine. When I'm out in public, I'm choosing to wear a mask. And I can explain that another day. But when I'm out in public, in most cases, I'm wearing a mask. And I mentioned that on Facebook, and someone said, I'm not someone who's going to walk around in fear. The Bible says we're not people that are governed by fear. The Bible says that we have not been given a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of sound mind. So I'm not going to wear a mask. That's what the person said to me on Facebook. It's a straw man argument, because I'm not saying we should walk around in fear. In fact, I'm not afraid. I don't think it's likely I'm going to get it. Even if I do get the disease, I don't think I'm going to die from it. Statistically speaking, it's highly unlikely that I would die from it. I'm going to wear a mask because I think it might be helpful. I don't want to accidentally, if I do have a disease that would be harmful to someone else, I don't want to pass it along. But I had this person saying, you're basically saying we should walk around in fear. That's not what I'm saying. You're straw manning me, right? You are saying that I'm saying something that I'm actually not saying. I don't think you should be afraid at all if you're a Christian, right? Christians should not be afraid ever of anything, because we know the end of the story, right? The pandemic is not uncertain for us as Christians. We know the end of the story. The end of the story is we will be with Jesus forever and ever, ever. Amen. Amen. Praise be to God. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be wise. And in my opinion, I believe it's wise to wear a mask. So I have elected that I'm going to wear a mask. You may disagree. That's fine. I don't care. That's fine. But don't tell me that I'm telling you should be afraid, because that's BS. Okay? It's infuriating, in fact, that someone would say, well, you just think we all should walk around in fear. No, I don't think we should walk around in fear. Quite the opposite, in fact. But we should walk in wisdom, right? So this person was straw manning me, and quite frankly, it ticked me off. Being straw manned is extremely frustrating, because it's just, you're being misrepresented. Here's this one. Calvinists say, this is a straw man argument, okay, that often will come from people who are anti-Calvinists. Calvinists say that everything is already predetermined. They don't believe in mission, that missions is valuable. But we know that missions and evangelism are valuable. Therefore, Calvinism is wrong. This is a very common straw man argument sent at Calvinists. People saying, "Oh, Calvinists, you guys just you don't believe in free will. You believe everything's already determined by God, so you don't believe in missions, because missions demand no non-deterministic worldview." That's not true. It's a garbage argument. It's straw man. Calvinists, this is not what Calvinists believe. In fact, the vast majority of the greatest missionaries over the last 300 years, the vast majority of them were all Calvinists. Name a great missionary, right, of the modern missions movement. Most of them have been Calvinists. That's the reality. So clearly, this is a terrible argument. This is a straw man. You are basically making Calvinists out to be something that they're not. On the opposite side, a lot of Calvinists attack Arminians. This is what they say. Arminians say that humans can choose and have free will. Humans control their own destiny. But we know that God really is in control. So Arminians don't believe that God is in control. Okay, that's a straw man argument. Okay, this is not what Arminians believe. Okay, so a Calvinist is basically propping up a version of Arminianism that's easy to knock down, but it's not a real version of Arminianism, right? So you're being unfair to the Arminian, because you're making them out to believe something that they don't actually believe. Right? You're insinuating or implying that they articulate a position that they don't actually articulate. And that's really unfair. That's a straw man argument. Okay. Additional strongman arguments. Christians are against gay marriage. They don't believe that all people should be treated with equality. Right? I got a spelling error there. I apologize. This is a strawman argument people use against Christians, right? You don't believe that all people should be treated with equality. No, I do actually, right? But equality doesn't mean that I should be in favor of same-sex marriage. Okay. Right? Complementarians believe that women can't do ministry. No, that's not true. Actually, it's quite opposite. Or the egalitarians don't believe that the Bible has authority for today. No, that's not true either. Right? We want to be very, very careful that we don't misrepresent someone, or that we don't just prop up a version of that position that's easy to knock down. Right? With the coronavirus, people are saying things like, if you are People there's a lot of straw manning, in fact, going on. I saw someone post on Facebook a meme that said, hey, I think it's valuable to wear seatbelts because they might be helpful. The person said, I think it's valuable to wear a mask because I think it's important, or I think it's wise, just like it's wise to wear seatbelts. And then someone else responded saying, it's not, but there is no law on the books that say I have to wear a mask. This is an executive order. And so, this is a stupid meme. This person's attacking one of their friends on Facebook. I didn't engage in the conversation. I just read through it. But one person is attacking another person. But then like you missed the point of what that person was saying. That person was not saying that you should wear a mask because you're required to wear a mask. It's not what the person was saying. The person was saying seatbelts are helpful. Wearing a helmet when you ride your bike could be helpful. In the same way, wearing a mask could be helpful. Therefore, I'm going to choose to wear a mask. That's what the person was saying. But her friend, we have a mutual friend, is saying on Facebook, this is stupid because seatbelts are the law, and there's been no law passed in our state to wear a mask. So you can't compare the two. Okay, well, actually, you can compare the two with the sentiment she had in mind, right? Now, if someone were to say you have to wear a mask because it's legal or because it's the law, just like seatbelts are the law, well, that would be inaccurate, right? That'd be a false equivocation because it's not against the law to not wear a mask in most parts of the country, right? There's just executive orders. They're not laws being passed by state legislatures, at least to my knowledge as of the recording of this video. So wearing a mask is not, there's no law in that, right? I think that's important to consider. But there are people out there that are making it seem like, well, this is what you're saying. No, that's not what I'm saying. Listen, you clean your ears out, right? Actually listen to what I'm saying. As I'm talking, don't be determining what you want to say in your brain, okay? Actually listen to my words. Let them go in your ears. Let them swirl around your brain for a moment and then articulate a response, right? But frequently we just assume what people are saying rather than actually listening. And so when I look through Facebook arguments, every single Facebook argument that goes more than 5 comments, okay? If you see a Facebook argument, it's got like 43 comments or 68 comments, I would bet any amount of money that there are lots of straw manning in that thread. Every single time you go through it and you look for it, and you see straw manning. So let's not be people who straw man other people. Okay. Ad hominem is when someone attacks someone. Right. A male doctor cannot understand what a mother needs, because he's never been a mother. Right. So you're attacking the male doctor because of who he is. Donald Trump says, someone says Donald Trump wants to build a wall, but he hates Mexicans. So obviously that's wrong. Okay. So rather than actually contending the debate around whether or not we should build a wall, you want to just attack him and say he hates Mexicans. Okay, that's maybe he hates Mexicans, maybe he doesn't. I don't know, but I think it's stupid to bring up. It's not the fact that he hates Mexicans or doesn't hate Mexicans is irrelevant to whether or not we should build a wall. Okay, so rather than attacking him, just bring up the conversation, right? Engage that. And people do this all the time. Ad hominems are all over Facebook debates, man. I think it's funny. Actually, there's a political someone I really like, who's a political commentator who recently had an ad hominem. He was attacking a reporter for CNN. The reporter for CNN was quarantined because of COVID-19. And the reporter from CNN basically refused to abide by all the quarantine orders after he tested positive. And then the reporter started attacking people publicly. And so this political commentator that I like says, yeah, because Chris Cuomo, he's the guy we should be listening to because, we should listen. He has no credibility on this topic because he didn't even listen to his own quarantine orders. Well, it's true. He didn't listen to his own quarantine orders and he probably put other people at risk. That's probably true. But the fact that he did that doesn't mean he has nothing to say intelligent on the conversation. That's an ad hominem, right? That's not a valuable argument. So how about this one? Someone may say, well, he's a Christian, so of course he would say homosexuality is a sin. Right. Genetic fallacy. Genetic fallacy is attacking a concept because of its origin. Ad hominem attacks the person. Okay. The genetic fallacy attacks the origin of the argument itself. All right. So a genetic fallacy would be, well, my grandma says debt is bad, but she grew up in the Great Depression. And they all think debt is bad. So do I really want to listen to them? Like, oh, Ted Cruz wants to lower taxes, but he's a Republican. So can we really trust the idea? Right. So the genetic fallacy is attacking the idea because of where its origins is, what where it comes from, the genesis of it. The ad hominem attack actually goes for the person itself that's making the argument. So the ad hominem attack and the genetic fallacy, they're very, very close. Sometimes they're kind of hard to tell apart. But that there's a slight distinction there. So if someone says, well, he says she's a great mom, but she's his wife, what else is he going to say? So like, oh, because he's married to her, therefore, you can ignore that. Well, this person says the Bible's reliable, but she's a Christian. So of course she would say that, like, because the person is a Christian, their opinion is no longer valid. That's a genetic fallacy. He said Joyce Meyer's a great teacher, but he's a Pentecostal, so of course he would say that. Or she said that R.C. Sproul's a great preacher, but she's a Calvinist, so of course she would say that. Sproul's a Calvinist, she's a Calvinist, of course she would say that, right? The genetic fallacy arguments, they reign supreme. There's lots of them going on out there. Equivocation is where people falsely equate two things, right? Show an example. Here's a good example. Complementarians, right? Complementarians are people who frequently believe that women should not be pastors. Complementarians believe that women cannot do ministry. Since we know that women can do ministry, complementarians are wrong. Okay, so this is also a strawman argument because they're misrepresenting what complementarians believe. Complementarians do not believe that women cannot do ministry. That is a false statement. So this is also a strawman. Okay, but the complementarians do believe this. It says they believe that women can't do ministry, but women can do ministry. See, the way the word ministry is being used here and the way the word ministry is being used here is different. They're using the same word, the same phrase, or the same idea, but they're using it differently, right? To confuse. Complementarians believe that women should not be elders. They should not be doing didactic preaching and teaching, okay? But they do believe women should be involved in ministry. There's lots of types of ministry that people can be doing and should be doing other than didactic teaching and preaching, right? You can do lots of ministry and not be a pastor, okay? Complementarians do believe that women should be doing ministry. So people will say this. They say, well, complementarians, they don't believe women can do ministry, and that's just garbage because women, we're saying women should do nothing. So that's garbage. So they're falsely equating two terms. I think that's really unhelpful. Let me see another good one. So here's another thing I've heard. This is from a politician. This is an exact quote from a politician. Something must be done. This bill from Congress is something. So we need to pass this bill. Okay. So the idea is that you got to do something. And the bill that's currently being passed in Congress, it's at least something. So we need to pass it. Okay. That's a terrible argument to why you should pass a bill. Okay. It's a terrible reason. Because you should actually be talking about the content. Should something be done? Yes. But something here in the first part of the phrase, something means a particular thing to help. Over here, this bill, the word something here just means it exists, right? So we must do a thing to help. And this bill from Congress, it's in existence. Okay. Therefore, we must pass this bill that's in existence. No, that's silly. But sometimes people use the same word, but they use them in slightly different ways. Okay. Here's a silly example on your screen there. Hot dogs, they're better than nothing. Nothing is better than hamburgers. Therefore, hot dogs are better than hamburgers. Now, you may say, Kenny, no one's ever going to use that example, right? That's silly. But you would say, no, people actually do that. That's a pretty common way of arguing. Let me see some other ones. Another equivocation. If someone is in favor of same-sex marriage, they may say, well, you said God is love, so why are you against love? See, they're using the word love there two different ways, right? God is love, but what you say is love is not what I say is love. Like, they're using the word love two different times, but they mean slightly different things, right? Here it says real Christians support people in need. Therefore, real Christians support same-sex relationships. We see the word support here and the word support here. They don't mean the same thing. The real Christians support people in need, meaning they help people in need. Yes, that's true. Real Christians do that. And therefore, real Christians support, but here the word support means endorse. So because Christians are supposed to be helpful, that means they should endorse or sanction or approve of same-sex relationships. How are those two connected? It's completely unconnected, but you're using the same term to mean two different things, but it's so quick and sly that sometimes people get away with it. People do this not just with words, they do this with ideals, they do this with phrases, they do this with concepts and definitions. It happens a lot. False equivocation. Adpopulum. This is when people, this is also known as the bandwagon appeal. This is when people just, say a lot of people are doing it. Recently, again, related to the pandemic, I made a statement on Facebook. Someone sent me a message. They were angry. They said, I've talked to a lot of Christians about this, and they all disagree with you. Okay, maybe they all do. First of all, I don't think that's probably true. I don't think all Christians disagree with me. That's probably bogus. But even if that's true, maybe they're all wrong. Maybe I'm right. Like the fact that a lot of people believe something doesn't make it true. Right? Like, that's not true. That's a stupid argument. So don't use that argument. Don't be stupid. Let me see. Come on, pretty much everyone agrees that McDonald's is bad for you. So it must be bad for you. Well, maybe it's bad for you. Maybe it's not. The fact that everyone agrees is irrelevant. I don't care what everyone agrees upon. Give me the facts. Give me the stats, the evidence that McDonald's is bad for me. Okay. So those are the kinds of arguments. People say things like, you're going to be on the wrong side of history. People say, well, the majority of people are now in favor of same-sex marriage. Or most people want to hear a woman preach occasionally. Maybe all those things are true, but it's irrelevant. It doesn't actually make the point. Okay. So this is an ad populum fallacy. Post hoc fallacy. This is when someone falsely blames something. The dinosaurs all ate vegetables and the dinosaurs died, so maybe vegetables will kill me. Okay, that's a stupid argument. There are a lot of people that use these arguments, right? Something happens, and then later they look back and go, well, they did that thing. It must have happened. It's kind of closely related to the slippery slope argument or the worst case fallacy argument, but you're usually looking back at something where the slippery slope argument and the worst case scenario argument are looking forward at something that has not yet happened. The post hoc fallacy is looking at something that already happened to make a point, right? They'll say, look, many cults have been started by women, so women leaders will make your church heretical, which, by the way, historically, it's true. A lot of cults have been started by women. That is true. But there are a lot of cults that have been started by men too. Like, it's a silly argument, right? Yes, it's true. All you're basically saying that a lot of cults have been started by humans. That's it. Okay. And that doesn't, so if you're going to argue that women shouldn't be leaders in the church because there have been cults that look at those cults back there. They started with a woman. And so therefore you shouldn't have a woman in your church leadership because that could happen to you. Okay. That's a post hoc fallacy. It's a cousin of the slippery slope and worst case scenario fallacies. Our soccer team was losing until I bought those new shoes. We have not lost a game since I got those new lucky shoes. You're right. That people say those kind of things. Suicide rates among LGBT teenagers have gone up since Trump took office. He's the monster causing it. Tragically, it is true that suicide amongst LGBT teenagers has gone up over the last few years. Tragically, that has happened. But I don't know if it has anything to do with Donald Trump. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. But it's on you to show me stats and evidence. This is a garbage argument, okay? You don't do that. So, ever since we took prayer out of schools, our society has gotten worse. Well, has it really gotten that much worse? Maybe it has. Maybe it hasn't. But you got to show me some stats that show that exactly. And you got to show stats that prayer out of schools literally caused that, which is really hard to prove. So I don't think that's a really good argument. Or on the opposite side, liberals may say, ever since we took prayer out of schools, our nation has become way more open-minded. I don't know that we've gotten way more open-minded. I think I would argue that there's some evidence that shows the opposite of that. This is not a very good argument. It's a post hoc fallacy, okay? False dichotomy is when you make things you're either for me or against me. You said I'm wrong, but I thought you supported me. Either you're a Republican or you're a baby killer. You're speaking in these broad terms. People use this all the time. I thought you were a good person, but you didn't donate to the charity. People say these kind of things, right? You don't drink beer, but I thought you really enjoyed having fun. These are false dichotomies. You can be someone who doesn't drink beer and still have fun, right? You can be a good person and still choose not to donate to the charity, right? You could be someone who says, I'm not a Republican, but you could also be against abortion, right? Or you could be pro-life, but not necessarily be a Republican, right? These are false dichotomies that we pitch frequently, or false dilemmas. Either you're against Trump's wall or you're a racist. Okay, you can be for the wall and not be a racist. You could be against the wall and still be a racist. Like the fact that you're a racist or not, or whether or not you're supporting Trump's wall is irrelevant, right? Now, are there some people that maybe be racist and that leads them to support the wall? Sure. Okay. But the idea that everyone who supports the wall is somehow racist, or that everyone is against the wall is not a racist, is simply silly, right? You're pitting two things against each other that are not, there's no evidence for. Okay. People say, I thought you were a loving person, but you're against same-sex marriage, right? You're pitting, you can be a loving person and be against same-sex marriage, right? Right? You're really open-minded, but you're against women preaching. No, you can be very open-minded and be against women preaching. It's possible, right? That's not a false. Those are not pitted against each other. They ought not be. I think that's important to consider. Red herring. Red herring is bringing up a topic that's unrelated. Red herring, I think, is the most common one right now. Red herrings are all over the place. Oh, it's infuriating how frequent these are. Okay, let me use some silly examples first. I know I said I was going to stop eating junk food, but it was on sale. Okay, listen, the fact that the potato chips are on sale is not relevant. Okay, if you say to your mom, listen, if your mom says, if you say to your mom, I don't want to eat vegetables, and your mom says, there's starving children in Africa. Okay, that's irrelevant. Like, that's not relevant. The fact that there are starving children in Africa that would want to eat these vegetables is irrelevant to the fact that I don't want to eat the vegetables. Okay, it's a red herring. It's not directly related. Here's a more serious one. If I say to someone, listen, I think I'm against abortion, but they say, what about women who've been raped? Well, that's a red herring, because it's actually not directly relevant. I am against abortion because I believe it's morally wrong. I believe abortion is murder. I mean, what about a woman what about a woman who's been raped? Okay, that's a great conversation, and we should have that conversation. Whether or not we should allow abortion in the case of rape, I'm willing to have that conversation. Let's have that conversation later. It's actually a different conversation. The conversation I'm mentioning that's more important to me is abortion murder, yes or no? And when I ask that question, people say, is abortion murder, yes or no? They say, well, what about incest? What about rape? Okay, that's a great question, but it's a different conversation. I'm asking you, is it murder, yes or no? And you're refusing to answer, right? That's a different question. Okay. This is a really funny one. Okay, I got an example. Ronald Reagan was in a debate with Walter Mondale in the mid-'80s when he was running for re-election, and there were a lot of reporters saying, "Hey, Ronald Reagan, you're too old." There's a lot of people saying that you're too old to be president, and so a reporter asked him about it. He said, "Mr. President, your opponent Walter Mondale is considerably younger than you. Do you think that age should be an issue in the campaign?" And President Reagan says, in just a classic fashion, "Not at all. Not at all. Age should not be a case. I refuse to exploit my opponent's youth and inexperience for political gain." And everyone in the audience starts cracking up laughing because it was a funny moment. If you ever Google this moment, it's hysterical. Ronald Reagan was one of the best ever in those kind of moments. His rhetoric, you know how to use rhetoric really well. Even though it was really funny and a lot of people liked Reagan saying it, it was actually a red herring. Ronald Reagan never actually answered the question, right? They're saying, are you too old for the position? Is your age going to be a problem? And he says, age should not be a part of the conversation. I am not going to exploit my opponent's youth and inexperience, right? He turns it around, and rather than actually answering the question, he brings up the youth and inexperience of Walter Mondale, which is brilliant if you're a politician, but it's still a logical fallacy, right? And I'm a fan of Ronald Reagan. As I look back on history, Ronald Reagan, in my opinion, is one of the best presidents in American history. But in this moment, he was logically fallacious. This is a terrible way to argue. As much as I love Ronald Reagan, this was a terrible logical fallacy, President Reagan. Here's another one. Sherry says, men and women have specific roles to play. John says, what about women who really are good at leading? Okay, that's irrelevant. Right? Women good at leading is not relevant to whether or not men and women have a specific role to play, right? John says, gay couples should not be allowed to adopt. And Bill says, what about all the foster kids being abused by foster parents? Okay, maybe there's a lot of foster kids being abused by foster parents. Yes, but that's an irrelevant conversation. Let's talk about that. Let's tackle that. Yes. But first, let's have the conversation as whether or not same-sex couples should be allowed to adopt, right? So rather than actually engaging the content, people will bring something up that seems related, but it's not, okay? People do this a lot. Let me see. Danny said this in this scenario, a girl says, I'm so hurt Todd broke up with me. And someone says, oh, get over it. Just think about all the starving children in Africa. Your problems are pretty insignificant compared to them. Okay, that might be true. Her problems may be insignificant compared to them, but it's irrelevant to the conversation. She's hurt that Todd broke up with her. Let's talk about why she's hurt and how to get over that. Okay. So these are, I'll skip, these are a bunch of examples. An emotional appeal or appeal to pity. These are people bring up, people appeal to emotion on things. Do you really want people to be single all their life just because they like the same sex, right? People bring this up in same-sex marriage conversations. If you say, hey, I'm against same-sex marriage, someone says, do you really want people to be single? Come on, it's so sad. It's so mean, right? It's an emotional appeal, right? So you're saying that a man can be a pastor, but a woman can't be a pastor? Come on, that's so oppressive to the women. Come on, right? It's just an emotional argument. It's a terrible way to argue, but most people use these kinds of arguments on a regular basis, or a lot of people use these arguments on a regular basis. Appeal to authority. Advertisers do this a lot. You should floss daily. Why? Well, 4 out of 5 dentists say you should floss daily. Okay, well, that's good, but that doesn't actually teach me why flossing is good, right? Appeal to ignorance. I saw this recently, actually. Someone did this. I thought someone said that someone was talking about Donald Trump, and they said Donald Trump colluded with the Russians to win the election. And then they posted it on Facebook. And then another person posted, do you have any evidence for this? What's the evidence that, he's been exonerated, blah, 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 defending Trump, right? And then the person who posted the original says, well, do you have any evidence that he didn't collude with the Russians? No. If you said he colluded with the Russians, it's on you to prove it. Okay, that's a stupid way to argue. Would you not have evidence, right? Let me give you some silly examples. If I say to someone, listen, there were aliens on our campus last week. And someone says, no, there weren't. And you say, well, can you give me evidence that there weren't any aliens? Well, you can't. You can't prove that there weren't aliens. Like, you can't do that. So you're shifting the burden of proof on this person, right? So I thought I had every reason to think I was doing fine leading the group. No one complained. Well, you don't know if anyone complained, actually, right? So this is an appeal from ignorance. The majority of people have always wanted to get rid of the Bible's oppressive ideology. They just have never had the courage to speak up about it. Okay, maybe, but you don't have any evidence for that, right? So I've heard people say this. Well, humans have always wanted to get rid of the Bible because the Bible's oppressive. And I say, well, why do you believe that? And they may respond and say, well, do you have any evidence that people didn't want to get rid of it? No. You made the statement. It's on you to prove it. Okay. The U2 argument, a two quote key argument, U2. This happens a lot. A lot of people I know who are married have said this comes up. Mary says, you were not very considerate last night. You left your dirty socks on the living room floor. And Spencer says, well, you left the dirty dishes in the sink, right? Okay. Well, the fact that she left dirty dishes in the sink is irrelevant to the fact that you left dirty socks on the floor, right? Like, people do this all the time. You did this. Well, you did this. Well, you did this. Okay, that's a terrible way to argue. It's stupid. It's irrational. It leads to fractures in relationships. Don't argue like this. Right? Someone says same-sex marriage isn't God's ideal design. You say, well, your marriage is on the rocks, right? Isn't that outside of God's design? I actually saw someone on Facebook post this once, which is heartbreaking to see that. And so the no true Scotsman fallacy is not one that I think comes up super often, but someone basically says, well, you're not a true Christian if you're not this. There's no true Scotsman would say this, right? So in this silly example here, John says no marketer would ever put 2 calls of actions on a single web page. Barb says, well, Lola is a marketer and she actually found great success doing the exact same thing. And John says, well, no true marketer would do that. Like, she's not a true marketer. People say this all the time. Well, Christian, no true Christian would say that. Well, I know a Christian who said that. Well, they're not a true Christian then, or like someone who believes the Bible would never do that. Well, but I know someone who believes the Bible and they did do that. Well, they're not a true Christian then. Okay, well, maybe not, but that's not a very good argument. You got to give me some better data than that. And that's it. I'll stop there. So that's it. Those are logical fallacies. These are just giving you a lot of examples of logical fallacies here. Want to go through them. Want to make sure that you have a good understanding as to what the logical fallacies are, understand some examples of them, and how they may come up in conversation. The better equipped you are to understand and recognize logical fallacies, the better you'll be able to argue, expose people. People have strong opinions, but most of the time it's because they have really irrational reasons for their opinions. And if you can kind of expose that in people, and help them see how their arguments are flawed and they don't really have good evidence for why they believe what they believe, and then you can present good evidence in a kind and diplomatic fashion, then you'll be able to woo them unto yourself and win the argument, persuade them to your way of thinking and your convictions when it comes to whatever the topic may be. But this is especially the case, I think, in our contemporary context whenever it comes to conversations related to gender and sexuality. So hope this video is helpful. If you have any questions or need anything at all, please feel free to reach out to me. If you're one of my students, email me, text me. If you're not one of my students, but you're just watching us on YouTube, I'd love to hear from you as well. Leave a comment in the comments below, reach out to me, and let's connect. Love you guys. Have a great day.